Just imagine all your greatest virtues were going to cause people to murder you. Hey there, welcome to another edition of the Sunday Scaries. I'm your host Mike, and today we're going to be talking about Ned Stark from Game of Thrones. I'm in a Game of Thrones mood because House of Dragons Season 2 just came out, and the original series was absolutely terrific, and Ned Stark is actually one of my favorite characters, not just in Game of Thrones, but in all of cinema. And I just kind of want to talk about, the horrors of being virtuous in an unvirtuous world through Ned Stark. So if you have never seen Game of Thrones and don't want any spoilers, this will have a lot of spoilers, so warning in advance. But if you've seen the show and want to hear some of my thoughts, or if you've never seen the show and just don't want to watch it and hear my thoughts, please continue watching. So to really examine Ned Stark, first of all, you got to look at the world he's in and kind of the different families that rule the mythical world of Westeros. And the Starks have ruled the North for over 8,000 years, which is his family. And yes, they bent the knee to the king of the seven kingdoms, right? All these houses came together and were forced to be in this kingdom hundreds of years before our story takes place. And Ned Stark is from a really prominent family. And they're a really good family. They worship the old gods. They're very religious. They're really into family and protecting their values and their culture. But Ned wasn't supposed to be the ruler of his house. He's from a pretty big family of siblings. He had two brothers and a sister, and he was the second oldest son. And what actually happened before we ever got to Game of Thrones was his sister was kidnapped and taken by the prince of the kingdoms, Rhaegar Targaryen. And his father and brother actually went to the king to get his sister back because the king was the father of Rhaegar, and they ended up getting burned alive. And then he was called the Mad King. He sent a letter to Ned, who was actually squiring with another really powerful house in the Vale through Jon Arryn, and was with his best friend Robert Baratheon, both very powerful families. And the king demanded both Robb and Ned's heads delivered to him by Jon Arryn. And they rose up and they fought this big war and overthrew the king. But unfortunately, Ned's sister died. He didn't want power, so he let Robert become king of the seven kingdoms, and he just wanted to go back to the north, which, by the rest of the kingdoms isn't really that desirable of a place, but his heart was there. He just wanted to grow a family. He, before the war started, actually married the woman of another powerful house, the Tullys, Caitlin Tully, and his brother was actually supposed to marry her, but he married her instead to make sure their houses had a strong alliance, and they have a really good marriage when we start watching the show. But you need to kind of have all that information to kind of know where he came from. And throughout the whole learning about Ned, everything about him's honorable, right? He's teaching his kids to be good human beings, teaching them to worship the gods. He teaches them about family first, duty, honor. He's not running around with random women behind his wife's back, even though most men in the seven kingdoms, even though they're supposed to, really stay true to their marriage vows, run around on a lot of different women. And his best friend, Robert Baratheon's the worst of them all as far as who became king. And the only real blemish on his whole kind of resume and his background is he has this bastard kid that he brought back from the war. And, obviously his wife is not happy about that. And he actually conceived his son right before he went off to war, and then he brings back this other son who they're about the same age, and so that's hard for her to deal with, but we'll kind of get into that in a minute. But outside of that, he's a completely honorable man, and everyone around him is kind of vying for power, wanting to move up in the rankings as far as greatest houses in the country. But Ned just really wants to be warden of the North. And not even want, but it's his duty since his older brother was killed, and he just wants to go north. He's not into all that, raise his family and continue to, serve his people the best he can. And that makes him a really great character. And I love the first season of Game of Thrones because it's really kind of the story of Ned Stark. Now, the first thing I really like about Ned Stark is He takes on duty even when it's something uncomfortable, and he's in a position where he has to make a lot of sentences on people's lives sometimes. And you see this in the very beginning where he takes all his sons out to find this deserter from the Wall, which is this group of people that guard the Seven Kingdoms on this giant ice wall that's like hundreds of miles long, and they swear to stay up there and defend the kingdom for the rest of their lives, kind of this legendary oath that they have to take. Granted, a lot of people are forced to go up there if they've done crimes, but this guy's running away. He catches them, he brings his kids, and he tells them, if I'm going to be the one to give him the sentence, I need to carry out the execution. And he actually beheads the person himself and shows, his kids. He wants them there to watch. But it's interesting because you see a lot of other lords in the show, and they'll pass a lot of sentences, and even kings, and they don't actually do it. They have other people carry out uncomfortable tasks for them. And I think it's really interesting that he takes it on himself as it's his responsibility, and he tries to teach his kids that. And you see a lot of that in the 7 seasons after the first one when he's long gone. Again, spoilers in this review. But I think that's really important. And you don't see a lot of these really powerful people actually getting their hands dirty. Maybe their souls with, really vicious decision making. Game of Thrones is not for the faint of heart, given a lot of characters die. But, that sense of duty is really unique in this show. And you even see him do it with smaller things. One of his children's dire wolves, which is a very sacred animal to him and his family, it's literally on their banners, is sentenced to die for something it didn't do, and the king is going to have it butchered by these random people, and he says, no, if the wolf has to die, I'm going to do it. And again, this was a completely innocent animal. It didn't do any crime in the show, and he goes and he kills the animal quickly and makes sure it doesn't suffer. And you can see the pain in his eyes when he has to do it. But he's not afraid to run away from doing painful things because he knows it's his job to carry out these sentences. And I think that's such a virtuous trait that a lot of people really should take on in their own lives. He's also really big on religion. He's kind of from this dying religion in his country, and a lot of people think he's weird. Even his wife isn't from the same religion, and she said when she came north how uncomfortable it was. And he teaches his kids to pray in these kind of sanctuaries with these giant trees that are supposed to be kind of like a vessel to be able to talk to the gods. And it's really interesting because everyone around him doesn't believe in these gods anymore. All these politicians he ends up getting involved with, they're doing all sorts of unvirtuous acts all around him, but he stays true and he keeps teaching his family, these things are important. Religion is important. Our values are important. Living this hard lifestyle is important. And it's so neat in the show because you don't have a lot of people acting that way, and you will see it rub off on his kids to some degree. Granted, they all have really complicated paths moving forward in the show after the first season, but it just shows you it's really hard to honor your values when you're in this world of all these people not doing it around you. And his virtues even rub off on his non-children. They have Theon Greyjoy, who's from the Iron Islands, and he's sort of a prisoner, but he's being raised by the Starks because his father had this big war. But the Starks essentially raised him, and by the end of the show you really see despite all his mistakes, he has this kind of redemption story because of Ned Stark raising him and giving him those values. And you just feel Ned's presence way after his death in the show, and I think that makes him such a powerful character. And you see no greed in Ned Stark. He let Robert be king. He didn't contest it at all, just wanted to go home, was happy for his buddy. He really didn't want to be second in command, which is called the Hand of the King in this universe. When Robert rode up, he really didn't want it, but he went down to help Robert because he knew his buddy was in trouble after the old hand died. Shortly into being down there, he realized there's this conspiracy going on. The old hand was murdered, and he went to go help his friend, not because he really wanted to, but out of duty, and he thought it was good for the Seven Kingdoms. And he thought his friend really needed him, but he really just wanted to stay north with his wife and his kids and continue to raise them. And the moment he gets down into the capital in King's Landing, he's surrounded by all these liars, these cutthroats, people who own brothels, which is totally against what he views as okay and right. And he's forced to do business with all these people, and he's just a fish out of water. But he's there to help people out of duty, and he wants to do the right thing. And once he finally does figure out that Cersei Lannister, who married Robert Baratheon, and she has his 3 kids, which, they're all the royal family, they're the next in line to rule the country. They're actually not Robert's kids. He was getting too drunk to really be able to get her pregnant. And, she actually had this relationship with her brother, twin brother, and all 3 of the kids are with her brother. Some weird stuff, right? But, and even for their time period, that's not okay because it's a medieval show. It's fine to marry like first cousins or even in some situations, your aunts and uncles, but you're not supposed to marry your siblings or have babies with your siblings in this case. And, instead of just going straight to Robert and telling him, he actually goes to his wife. He tells her, he found out and gives them time to run away. And that was a really foolish decision. And a lot of people disagreed with him doing that. And it ended up being his undoing because, it gave Cersei time to get her husband too drunk on a wild boar hunt and get him killed. Gave her time to get her forces ready. And when it was time for them to transfer power over, and it ended up being his undoing because he gave them too much time to prepare, but he did not want to murder children and women. He didn't want to be like some predecessors in history, and he viewed that as wrong, and so he gave them too much time, and he ended up being backstabbed through some alliances, and he eventually got his head cut off for it. But the guy went down trying to do the right thing, even though he knew it wouldn't serve him in the best interest. And he always is standing by his values throughout the show. Even all these people are trying to talk him out of not letting Robert's brother become king. He's this like legendary military commander, but he's very harsh and probably wouldn't be a very lovable king. But he's like, no, he's rightful in line, and I'm going to support him. And I'm not going to support people that maybe would be better kings, but this is how it is. This is how our society is. And he still powers through. And again, it ends up getting him killed. The last thing I kind of want to touch on, I said in the beginning of the video that, he had one little blemish on his whole kind of personal character. And that was he has this bastard kid, Jon Snow, which again, doesn't really make any sense based off everything about him when you're watching the character. And as Game of Thrones goes through, he raised this bastard kid really well. He's very honorable. He has this whole storyline. Through his storyline, you eventually find out that, this whole war that was started because Robert Baratheon was actually engaged to Lyanna Stark. And again, she was kidnapped, and the story was that she was kidnapped by the prince who already had a wife and kids, and he raped her. But it turned out none of that was true. They actually fell in love with each other, and he actually went and got his marriage annulled, and they ran off together, and they got married in secret. And so this whole war, really over this kidnapping and raping, and Robert was in love with Lyanna, even though she did not reciprocate the feelings. That was an arranged marriage. The whole war was not really about what everyone said it was about, and they were in love. And she actually ended up having a baby and died in childbirth. And Ned, at the end of the war, after everyone was defeated, went to this tower where she was at. She was dying in childbirth, and it was Jon Snow. And, on her deathbed, she made him promise, protect him. Robert would kill him because he was on this whole terror of killing any of the Targaryens because they had been the kings and queens of Westeros for, hundreds of years at this point. They just led this mad war. He blamed them for him not getting Lyanna, and she asked him to protect the child. And so Ned, who's this very honorable guy, and you have to think his honor means a lot to him, and he lies to everyone and says, yeah, I cheated on my wife, and I have this bastard child. Think about that. That has to be really hard for a guy who is trying to teach his kids to be honorable, preaches honor, preaches it to all his people that he, wardens over. And he does this because he loves his sister. It's very obvious he loves Jon. You see quite a bit of affection for him. And he doesn't tell anyone, even his wife, because he cannot let this get out because it will cause another war. And even though this baby is the rightful king to the Seven Kingdoms, he takes it as his own, lies, says it's just a bastard child, and teaches his nephew good values, raises him well. But he's also growing up with a lot of hate because, Ned's wife is not exactly happy about this child. And she even confesses in an episode that she wanted him dead and she knew it was wrong and prayed to the gods for forgiveness and to not take it out on her children. But, it was really hard on her and Ned's relationship, yet he still took this burden on, had all these people attack his character, and even suffer in his marriage to protect his nephew. And you have to think some of it is his love for his sister, some of it's his love for his nephew. And while lying is not a virtuous act, this lie and kind of what he does to protect this child and the way he raises this child is such a virtuous act and such a burden for someone to do. And it's really my favorite twist in Game of Thrones, which has a lot of really great twists and turns throughout the whole story. But I just think it's such a fascinating relationship. And I just love the man that Jon grows up to be. And he's very humble because he grows up a bastard, and when he's really a king. I mean, he's really a prince. He should have been king of the Seven Kingdoms. So he would have been so much different had he grown up as a prince and, around all this royalty and stuff. This whole relationship and the lengths that Ned Stark goes to protect this child, this completely innocent child, that a whole war was kind of fought over, even though no one knows he existed. What a virtuous act. Anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. I hope you liked my views on Ned Stark. I'm definitely going to be doing some more reviews on Game of Thrones and the House of Dragons. I'm going to actually do a whole ranking episode once the final episode of House of Dragons season 2 is over. And I'll let you know my thoughts of, how good I think each season are from both the two different shows. But again, thanks for tuning in. Please subscribe and like if you haven't. And all I know is at least my wife and family and friends and work honor me for being virtuous and don't threaten to cut my head off. Poor Ned Stark. Catch you next episode.